Patrick Stromberg. He is with Clear Skies Aviation in Montana. Patrick, hello. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Great. We are glad to have you here. Thank you. And tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, and your business before I launch into a whole raft of questions.
Yeah, so basically, you got my name, Pat Stromberg. I live up in Reserve, Montana. I'm based off the Plentywood, Montana airport. Um, I've been in the aerial application industry. This will be my 13th year now, I guess. And along with that, we also farm uh, wheat, barley, peas, um occasionally something weird like flax.
That's not weird. That's pretty normal stuff. And so let's talk about where you are in Montana. That's generally a pretty dry neighborhood. What do things look like right now? I know eastern Montana has actually had a fair amount of snow.
It hasn't been bad. I would call it about an average winter. So we had snow that pretty well covered everything. Um, you couldn't see the stubble, which was a change from the last couple of years because we didn't have much snow.
Hmm.
There's actually runoff this year, which is neat. Potholes are filled up that haven't been for a little while. So pretty good start right now. We're
Okay.
supposed to get some rain here towards the end of the week.
Well, we've got lots of questions. The whole reason I contacted you, Patrick, and asked you to come on air with us, because from time to time you do aerial seeding. So can you explain that just a little bit? I mean, we're in the Red River Valley of North Dakota. There's a good chance it's going to be wet on some fields for quite some time. Where would aerial seeding take a play in all of this?
Well, yeah, especially for you guys, because I've seen the pictures of the snow. I think it's going to be a while before they get out in the fields, especially being that Red River Valley. I went to school in Grand Forks, and it doesn't take much snow to flood. So, but the benefit of the airplane is you can fly over top of it and not worry about getting stuck. Um,
And Patrick,
it's
how precise is aerial seating compared to your traditional seating?
So you're not going to get like the same precision you would as far as like the actual rows and stuff with an air seeder or a conventional drill or whatever. But it actually is, they've got it down to a pretty good science where you'll figure out your swath width based on your seed size, um, and your, well, yeah, it's more or less kept by your seed size and what the seeds weigh, what the spreader will throw it out at. And I've seen it where on the upwind side, like, so you got a upwind and a downwind side because we always work into the wind, and it'll draw a line on that upwind side just like an air seeder would, and then it feathers out just a little bit on the south side, but there's always just a tiny bit of overlap where you try not to leave a skip anyway.
And what are the benefits from aerial seating compared to just your traditional seating?
Well, there's obviously the time factor. You can do it uh, generally a whole lot faster with the airplane, depending on seed rates and all that. But for the most part, it's always faster, and then you don't have to worry about going out there and getting stuck. Um, yeah, it's
Right.
So,
it comes into play when it's muddy.
so airplanes can only hold a certain amount of weight before, it's just too dangerous to operate them or they're not operable. How much field or acreage can you cover with one load of seed if you're doing aerial seeding?
So most of the stuff I've done is cover crop seed,
Mm-hmm.
which is generally smaller in size than like wheat or barley or especially corn and peas, stuff like that. Um, and it goes on at a fairly light rate because the seeds are so small.
Mm-hmm.
Anywhere from probably 80 acres up to 200 plus.
See, that's a lot more than I was thinking in my head. And this was a topic we were talking about a lot last year because we had such a late
Yeah.
plant with all the flooding in the northern valley. And when I first heard about this concept, I'm like, what did they do? Take the corn kernels and just load it into a Gatling gun and shoot it out the side door into the ground? But you
Not
had
quite.
mentioned it was like a hopper thrower or something like that disperses the seed.
Yeah, it's actually it's an apparatus that goes underneath the plane, and it's
Okay.
connected to the bottom of the hopper where you would normally have your liquid chemicals, and it's purely air driven. So the stuff gravity feeds out of the bottom of the hopper, and it goes into the gate of the spreader, and it just gets blown out by the airspeed.
So is there a certain amount of wind that you can't do this in? Is there like a threshold to where if you're flying and you got a 15, 20 mile per hour wind that it just blows most of the seed out? Or are you close enough to the ground to where that really doesn't play much of a factor?
It does play a factor, and you got to weigh the seed size into it. You can typically run, if you're throwing seed out or fertilizer, in higher wind than you can with a liquid solution because it moves less. But there is a limit. I did we did some teff grass a couple years ago, and that stuff is so small. I was even flying over the roads trying to get it into the field, and it was only blowing maybe 8 miles an hour. The bigger stuff, 15, 20, probably somewhere in there.
So how close to the ground are you, and what speed? I mean, we're talking airplanes. You're going quick, but how fast are you moving, and how high above the ground are you doing this at?
So when you're seeding, you're generally higher than when you're liquid spraying.
Okay.
So you're about 40 to 50 feet
Okay.
because you're trying to get that stuff to spread out as much as possible.
Right.
And then you're cruising along. The spreader slows you down a little bit, and you're not in close proximity to the ground, so you don't get the aerodynamic effects of ground effect. So you're probably doing about 135
Oh wow.
as you're applying.
Okay, so let's knock this up a little bit. So, to
That's
the next level.
That's twice as fast as you ever drive
That's as
anywhere,
fast as I
Justin.
can. That's twice as fast as I can run, Bridget.
I'll bet. Good effort. Nice.
When you're doing liquid application, I've seen some people really close to the ground. How much closer to the ground are you for liquid application, and how much of is there some form of an adrenaline rush doing that?
Initially, there is, yeah. After several hours of doing it, you kind of get over that.
Right.
But you're usually shooting for about 8 feet.
Wow. You're still cruising at like 135.
Faster because you're close to the.
Oh,
So this plane runs through the field about 145, and if you forget to pull the power back as you get lighter, you'll see up to 160.
Wow. Well, we got to hit bottom of the hour here. I got one thing I want to ask before we go to break. And first, if anyone wants to call in with any questions, you can reach out to us on the Red Wing Shoes studio line, 701-293-9000. But this is something Bridget brought up last year with aerial applicators. Do you have knives or blades attached to the wheels in case you hit power lines? Is that still a thing?
Yes,
Wow.
it is. This particular plane, I haven't put them on yet. I just haven't got to it. But all Thrush aircraft come with them, wire cutters on the landing gear, and they all have some form of a wire mitigation device by the windshield, whether it's a cutter or this one just has kind of a diverter. And then there's a cable that runs from the top of the cockpit to the tail, because when you're in the air, the tail sits higher. And if you do go under the power lines, you could potentially grab a wire with the tail, and that cable will keep that from happening.
Is that even lawful to do, to go underneath the wires?
It is, yep.
Wow.
It's
This
not
is an intense little job here.
It can be. I've used that wire thing before.
Well, we're going to have to hear
Forgot
that.
about
We'll have to hear that story on what happened there when we come back. And before we went to break, we were kind of touching on the fact that these planes, they come with knives and blades attached or attachments for the wheels. So if you hit the power lines, you cut through the power lines.
You
Sounds
make
like
this-
James Bond
Right.
plane.
This is some
Right.
intense stuff that's going on with this aerial application. I mean, it just sounds absolutely intense. I can only imagine at times how many G's you're actually pulling in that. I'll ask you that here in just a moment. But you want to join in on our conversation, ask a question, what it's like, certain things that go into the job. 701-293-9000 is our Red Wing Shoes studio phone line. You get those questions asked and answered. But Patrick, before we went to break, you said you've had to use these blades before or something along those lines, that you had to do something with it. You want to share what that story was, if you can?
Yeah, it was, well, several years ago now, I guess, but I was spraying a field that had multiple oil wells in it, and each one has a power line going to the oil well. And I thought I had her pretty well mapped out in my head, but I missed one. And I went under it without even knowing it. And the only reason I knew was because I felt the tail get pushed down. That cable caught it. And
Wow.
when I turned around, the neutral wire was laying there.
Hey guys, I got to take a break. I got to make a quick phone call to the power company and let them know that.
It was the neutral line. That's so bad.
Wow. How
Funny
often?
because
Yeah,
I was like, yeah, figure that one out. No track.
No tracks. Don't know how that line got cut.
I don't know. It just. Yeah, this is the wind. The wind did it. It was the wind. How often do stories like this happen? I mean, does that happen often? Is it just maybe a once or twice a year? I mean, how much safety and safety training goes into aerial application? I mean, what do you got to do to even be able to do this? I can only imagine there's quite a bit of requirements and training and flight hours you have to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of, every state is different as far as the requirements to perform aerial application. At a minimum, though, you got to have a commercial pilot's license, and you have to be certified by the FAA. So in my case, I'm the operator and not a hired pilot. So I'm the one that holds they call it a Part 137 certificate. And so you go through a whole bunch of stuff with the FAA where they come inspect your planes. There's like an oral and a written kind of test that goes along with it. And hopefully at the end of it, you get a certificate and then you're able to do it. But back to your, like the safety part, there's a tremendous amount of safety stuff that goes on through the state and national organizations. We have what we call the PASS program, and it's a yearly thing that the NAAA, the National National Aerial Agricultural Applicators Association, it's a lot to say, puts on. And several states actually require it to get licensed each year, but they go through accident analysis, fatigue stuff. Every year they change it based on accidents and stuff that have happened. So you'll actually go through all the scenarios of some of the accidents so that everybody can learn from it. But as a rule, you try not to run into stuff. And
Right. I would imagine you probably don't want to do that at 150 miles an hour in an airplane 8 feet off the ground.
Now, it gets your attention.
I bet it does.
And Patrick, we had a caller, and I think you touched on this earlier a little bit. Our caller had a question: what's the wind limit when you're seeding from the air?
Yeah, there again, it kind of is determined by the seed size, and most of what I've done, and a lot of what gets actually seeded from the air, is smaller seeds. So it's probably in that 10 to 15 mile an hour range. If you were doing something bigger, corn, peas, soybeans, which I haven't really heard of many people doing that, you could get away with more wind because they're heavier.
Right. So, Patrick, I happen to know that you are very active in your state association for Montana's aerial ag aerial applicators, but also nationally you've done quite a bit of work. And when you're doing that, are you encompassing folks with drones now, or has that strictly stayed to fixed wing and helicopters and so forth in your realm, or how does any of that look as drones enter ag aviation?
So actually, it is something that we've brought in uh, on the national level, especially. We actually have several members on the board that are from drone companies, and it's basically so we can learn from them and they can learn from us because we obviously have some concerns about these unmanned vehicles flying around at the same altitude that we're at. Um, so we're working real closely with them to try and find a safe solution to uh, integrate them both together. And the technology for the drones, as great as it is at this point, their efficiency is still far behind what a manned airplane can do. Time will tell if it becomes a viable option, but there's a lot of people getting into it and trying it out.
And with all of those things that are going on with drones, um, I just want to make sure to reiterate because we talked about this on break here. Not only do you have to have your pilot's license in the position that you have, Patrick, the same that someone who flies a drone has to have a license, you also have to be a pesticide applicator. You have to be licensed for that as well in your concurrent state. And does that transfer across the line from Montana to North Dakota, et cetera?
Yeah, so that's correct. You do have to have a commercial applicator license. Um, it does transfer. Every state has different requirements. North Dakota and Montana are they cooperate pretty well. So I do go over there from time to time, and basically you got to license the plane in North Dakota, and you got to prove you're a Montana current applicator, and then there's a couple other hoops to jump through, but it's relatively easy because of the reciprocal agreement. Other states, you might have to go as far as to retest.
Okay. Let's go ahead. I know we're all asking questions back and forth over here. So I want to go back to with the Aerial Application Association in Montana. As you have, what have you seen change in that in your time frame? Because you have come in as a pilot, but now also have had some leadership positions. Any big major changes or policy that you look at that you want to make sure you're behind as a pilot in Montana?
Montana, we're pretty fortunate. There hasn't been a lot of legislation come by that would significantly impact what we do. So that's obviously a bonus for us. Other states like Washington and Oregon, they've outright tried to ban it altogether. And those state associations have to work a lot harder than we've had to be able to keep doing what they do. I really don't think there's been too much significant in the state of Montana that we had to fight. Re-register. Well, let's see. Like they rewrote the handbook for becoming an applicator, and we actually helped with that.
Good.
So yeah, we're pretty lucky here.
I wanted to ask, because I'm sure you've heard or come across a lot of stories in the business, if there's a craziest experience you've had or story you've heard from somebody else in the career that just, this is what happened. You're not going to believe it, because Bridget was telling us a story of someone who was misjudged a situation and put a plane through a shelter belt and put a plane-sized tree or a hole in the tree line, and then their applicator bar was laying on the ground. And I've heard of people having to do emergency landings on top of corn before, and that didn't end very well because the airplane flipped over because the landing gear caught it. And anything like that you'd like to share?
Yeah, every year there's unfortunately that stuff can happen just because of the environment we work in. And yeah, I mean, if you've been in it long enough, more than likely you'll have some story of a close call. I've had one where I parked a plane in the field, not by choice. It decided on its own that it liked Earth better than the air.
Got it.
They do that sometimes.
I was along for the ride at that point. And yeah, it's hard to even think. There's so many stories out there, different close calls, and I've heard of people actually hitting deer while in the air.
Wow.
who had more vertical then, the deer or the plane was just that low?
That's a
Wow.
big
Well,
deer.
I think you mean Santa's reindeer.
Yeah, Santa's reindeer. There we go.
Yeah,
Well,
that was actually a friend of mine that did that.
wow, that's
But safety first. I mean,
hard
that's
to
a
believe.
safety in ag is a huge deal, whether you're in the plane like Patrick is, whether you're on the ground as an applicator, or whether you're just planting. Yeah, safety is a big deal. And I think Patrick would reiterate that as well for everybody listening.
It really is. Patrick, this has been really fun. Thanks for sharing the stories and telling us a little bit more about how this aerial application is done, because I had no idea. There are a lot of people like me in our urban environment that have no idea. They just drive down I-29, they see a plane going over fields. Oh, I wonder what they're doing. Why are they so low to the ground?